All right, our next panel is a journalist panel. And as it happened, Josh Brogan from the Washington Post was going to be on this panel, but he got called away to go to Japan. And so he just couldn't make it work to be on our panel today. But that's okay, because we have a replacement, a step up with Jim Blanchard, okay? Jim Blanchard. And so first of all, our journalist panel here is going to take a look at the security of Greenland. They're going to start us off in a dialogue discussion about people who dig into this. And our moderator is our very own Diane Francis, who's a member of our executive committee. Diane is the editor-at-large of the National Post and is a distinguished professor at Toronto Metropolitan University's Todd Rogers School of Management. And in addition to writing for the National Post, Diane also writes for the Financial Post, the Kyiv Post, and publishes her own weekly newsletter on Substack. She's the author of 10 books and an outstanding commentator on U.S. and Canada relations. And here to introduce her panel, Diane.
Good. Can everybody hear me? Thumbs up? Okay. Yes, so we have Todd Spangler, and Todd is with the Detroit News World, and Jim Blanchard is a designated hitter today as a journalist slash ex-governor, ex-ambassador, and all-around expert on most things. I'm just going to start with a little bit of a journey through the history and some of the strategic questions that I want our panel to address. People, I don't think, are quite aware of the history of Greenland vis-a-vis the United States. Back in the 30s, a group of utopian engineers in the United States dreamed of something called the Technate. And what they dreamed of was one governance structure that went from Greenland all the way down to the top of South America, including Canada, the Caribbean, and the United States. Their idea was, because of the Depression, that they thought that places should be run by engineers and technologists, not politicians and businessmen. And the idea, it was a utopian notion that it would harness resources and redistribute wealth fairly among the citizens. Interestingly, one of the key members was Elon Musk's grandfather. And Elon Musk's grandfather was a key player in the technocracy movement. And of course, we know Elon now is maybe the richest guy in the world, depends on the day of the week. And he certainly has become political. And I would say that what's interesting about Greenland is the fact that Elon Musk and many other members of the Silicon Valley aristocracy have long time regarded Greenland as very key toward doing a number of things that, besides surveillance and military importance and minerals and metals, that it is a means of retaining technological dominance by putting data storage and computer devices underground in its Arctic climate, and also because it is strategic in terms of space travel. And that is going to be, of great interest to the world in future. And then, of course, on top of all of that, we have Trump's interest in it. And I think that was stoked by Musk in Silicon Valley, and also stoked by the fact that Russia is way ahead in the Arctic race, if there is an Arctic race. It is, and it's established its coastline, Arctic coastline, as an eventual alternative to the Suez and Panama canals. And China's lurking about. And so there's commercial and military reasons that Greenland, as well as certainly Canada, are going to figure large in strategic plans toward the future. So I wanted to turn to Todd first. And I wondered, from the point of view of being a political writer, a journalist, someone who has to be apprised of what's going on, how would you rank the importance politically and strategically of Greenland and the issue of annexation of Greenland and Canada.
All right, I think this thing is on. Can be heard? Great. And no feedback as of yet. Thanks, Diane. And it's a great question. I did want to start out by saying that I found it fascinating that the Greenland and Denmark's relationship goes back to 1397, I think was the date I heard.
1930s.
Well, that this was actually I mean, that 200 years before Shakespeare was writing in Hamlet about young Fortinbras taking up arms, Greenland was connected with Denmark, which I find absolutely fascinating. I think from obviously from a strategic standpoint, there's no question that Greenland is extraordinarily important to Arctic defense and is going to remain so. The large countries, the major superpowers, China, Russia, the U.S. are clearly taking a great interest in what's going on across the Arctic with climate change. That's not going to change anytime soon. Politically, I think regarding President Trump, his rhetoric regarding Greenland and to a degree Canada about being states has backed off a great deal in recent months. I'm sure lots of people in this room and watching are glad to see that. I wouldn't expect that to continue. At some point, that's going to come back. With the president, it generally does. He doesn't let things go forever. But I think it's taken a backseat to several other things going on worldwide right now. But how serious that is, absolutely positively remains to be seen. But clearly, there's a lot of political interest going on with Greenland that's not going to change because of its location, because of climate change, and that's been the case in the past as well. I mean, during the Cold War, there were flights. There were nuclear flights going around. At the time, as I recall, there were some disarmed nuclear weapons that were lost for a time. That in 1968, maybe one's still out there somewhere, as I recall. It's of great importance, and I don't see that changing, even though I think a lot of Americans are very surprised to hear that and to learn about that. Jim?
Yeah, well, first I want to clarify, Todd Spangler is the Washington correspondent for the Detroit Free Press. He's been with them at least 18 years. He is their lead political writer, respected by virtually everyone that follows the news here in Washington as well as in Michigan, and follows Canada, follows the auto industries, following tariffs. He's covered 5 presidential campaigns, numerous senatorial campaigns, which we have one coming up. As a matter of fact, Haley Stevens is running for the Senate. Her chief of staff has been here monitoring.
As are other Democrats. Let's get that.
Yeah, well, but I'm biased. Anyway, first, Lori, thank you for managing the thing, and for both Representative Ifbeson and Deputy Steve, thank you for being with us. I don't think, first of all, it's hard to, most people don't take President Trump's claims of trying to buy Greenland or annex it or whatever, or Canada seriously, except that he does. He has these, quirks, and given his psychology, oftentimes has a hard time distinguishing fantasy from reality. And I think being in a real estate development, he loves the idea of acquiring things, building things. He's now trying to build a ballroom on the White House, which is really goofy, but it's happening. So you just have to take everything seriously. I just look back on this, Todd, because I was not planning to be part of this panel, but I didn't want you to sit up here lonely.
I appreciate it.
Ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the strengthening of NATO and enhancing defense investments by NATO members has become really, really important. And I think, Denmark, having been occupied by the Nazis during World War II, takes it probably more seriously than we do. But it's interesting. I never thought I'd see Sweden joining NATO, for example, or Finland, and they did. That tells you something about how things have changed. There's also reports of the Russians, with submarines trying to, at one point, cutting some cable lines to Norway. There's a lot of activity up there, and you add to that climate change and the warming. It's pretty amazing. I've been up to the Arctic as ambassador to Canada and had different military people show me what was the Northwest Passage, which was a dream, really, and they finally found it. But now it's wide open. So it totally changes the naval maneuvers up there. So there's going to be a lot of interest in this. But the interesting thing is that Denmark has made huge new investments in defense. And I think it's as much the Russian factor than it is anything that President Trump has said.
Well, I'd love to hear what Diane's comment on that, but I will say that I heard the ambassador mention that I think you said something along the lines of we're paying our fair share. It remains to be seen whether or not this president is going to end up believing. I mean, certainly if past performance predicts what goes forward, the Trump administration will expect even more. I know that the NATO secretary is in town today, so I wouldn't be surprised if there are more suggestions, strong suggestions being made by the Trump administration going forward. Wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah, never, always up the ante, be a deal maker. But the reality is, we've always asked, every president has asked our NATO allies to spend at least 2% of their budget on defense, and Denmark is up at what, 3.5, and on the way to 5. I mean, so they're in pretty good shape on that one, I think. But again, I think those that are, including the Baltic nations, when you think about the threat of Russia, if you're Estonian, Latvian, or Lithuanian, you got to be really concerned about whether NATO is going to hang together, stay together, and make the investments and make the commitments and live up to Section 5 of NATO. And I'm sure the Danes are watching it very carefully. I think there's been, as I recall, reading about drones floating around Denmark that have been largely attributed to Russia. I'm seeing Steve shake your head. Am I misrepresenting this? All right. Yeah, all right. Well, anyway.
So the other question I have is that the Arctic Council has been in operation for a long time, but the media never covers it. It's pretty, I think, pretty weak, and it's weak to the extent that China was able to get a sort of a surrogate membership on the Arctic Council, as if they're anywhere near the Arctic coastline. But this underscores the fact that Russia, on behalf of China and with China, has created a Northwest Passage that can't be created above Canada, because Canada's Arctic coastline is littered with an archipelago of hundreds of islands. So there's no crossing it unless you cross right through the middle of the Arctic Ocean. But the Russians have all kinds of icebreakers. They have stations. They have nuclear reactors up there. They have cities up there, and that's where China can transport goods in half the time and divert its way around the two major canals. I think that poses a commercial challenge for the United States as well. And I just wanted to know if there's any talk of that, or any movement to somehow mitigate or watch that carefully.
From my perspective, I certainly don't know if there's conversations ongoing about that. I think that when the conversation about Greenland comes up, it's coming up in all those different ways. When President Trump, and frankly, I believe that President Obama had conversation, or had some mentions, not anywhere near as bellicose, but mentions about the importance of Greenland too. That the more Russia projects itself in the Arctic, the more this goes on, the more concern it becomes to a superpower like the US that something has to change with that. That's going to open up all kinds of areas for different organizations and companies and businesses to start, and different interests to wonder exactly about what Diane's talking about in protecting their interests, or what is going to open up to begin a new interest in the future. I will say that with 57,000 people and no roads, I don't think General Motors is going to be bringing a lot of vehicles in there, although probably a lot of heavy trucks and things would play out very well.
You know, it's interesting, all the talk about rare earth minerals, materials. Canada's got an abundance of those. And when I hear the president say, there's nothing we need from them, well, we're already receiving huge amounts of energy, particularly in oil and gas and hydro. But when you get into rare earth minerals again, which China now is dominating, you can see the importance of Greenland, as well as Canada. And with the warming of the planet, then I guess the theory goes the minerals are going to be more accessible, and as will additional oil and gas. But I understand just geologically that's a huge undertaking, which may be why no U.S. company has made an investment there.
Yeah.
But the Aussies and others, Canadians have.
I was interested that the representatives were stationed in China. And I'm very curious about what that relationship was like with the Chinese regarding Greenland. Whether they had similar interests in developing and grabbing hold or
China's on the Arctic Council. They don't have a vote, but they're on there. They're watching everything going on. So that is of interest.
Have they been visiting Greenland? Yeah. To clarify for those who are online, the representative has indicated that China is an observer at the Arctic Council, not a member. And to the degree there's been interaction, it's been really related to trade, not national security, basically. Did I summarize that? Yeah. Diane?
Yeah, I couldn't hear that audience participation at all. Okay, so getting back to the China Arctic thing, there have been 2 or 3 incidents in the last 10 years of Chinese research vessels and surveillance vessels hanging around and actually going into the Canadian Arctic and getting on land and checking out this and that. And Canada has virtually no military presence in the Arctic. And this is something that I think should have been corrected a long time ago by Canada, but it's been a laggard in terms of a NATO member and military expenditures. What are the Americans doing out of Alaska? I know they've bolstered their troop deployment and the number of ships and icebreakers and so on out of Alaska. Presumably, they're going to be patrolling the Canadian coastline. Do you know, what do you know about that, Jim?
I don't. I will tell you, having lived in Canada and visiting the Arctic and feeling the culture, that it's interesting. Canada really thinks of itself much more so as an Arctic country than the U.S. does, an Arctic nation. They also really think of themselves more as a maritime country than we do as well. It's interesting. So they covet that great white north up there and forget that we have Alaska. So our contact is Alaska, and it's been national security. Look, we've had this base in Thule since I was basically born. So we have an interest, but I have no idea what's currently going on. That's why I wasn't going to be part of this panel. I'm just here because I don't want the distinguished Free Press reporter sitting up here alone.
And the distinguished Free Press reporter
When he's
appreciates that.
been kind enough to help us out. So I'm going to defer to you, Todd.
Well, and again, Josh not being here might have many more things to say about this than you or I do. But don't you believe with Prime Minister Carney feeling the need, obviously the need to renegotiate these tariffs that the U.S. has on Canada, and the fact that the Trump administration, and President Trump specifically, has talked about using tariffs as a wedge to get what he wants on defense, on whatever it might be, that maybe there will be, to Diane's point, some push to increase even more defense spending and maybe security as a means of Canada getting what it wants to see in terms of trade policy with the U.S. I mean, it does very much seem like, not just seems, it's obvious that the Trump administration is using this market to get what it wants on defense and other things, and that's likely to continue forward, especially regarding Canada, because through the campaign, going through Michigan, going through other places, President Trump repeatedly talked about how much the U.S. was spending. He got the number inflated, but how much the U.S. was spending to defend effectively Canada, but meaning protecting the U.S. from, Russia sending missiles over the Arctic Circle.
Yes.
Well, I think, Todd, just to,
Not
I
a
know
great
that.
quote, quite frankly, but
No, I have some. Yeah, I mean, look, as many of you know, right now, U.S. relations with Canada are the worst in modern history. And that's not just because of tariffs. That's because of the insults, the reference to 51st state, making claims we don't need anything. Why are they making cars in Canada? What kind of Canadian cars do they make? Displays an enormous amount of ignorance. The reality is, in terms of the relationship, which I know something about, in terms of trade with Canada, all of you need to know that we have we, United States, have a manufacturing surplus with Canada. We have a merchandise surplus with Canada. We have a services surplus with Canada. We have an agricultural surplus with Canada. But in all those areas, it's pretty much an integrated markets that work to our benefit. We do have a trade deficit on energy with Canada, and we want that. It's basic oil and gas from Alberta and hydro from Quebec, which, by the way, provides enormous amount of electricity to New England. We could be energy self-sufficient on our own, but the oil that we produce in the U.S. is not refinable in our refineries. So that's why we export it to Europe and other places. And we then use the oil from Canada, which fits our refineries. We and Canada have been energy self-sufficient since at least the beginning. Well, Canada's always been energy self-sufficient, but we have been that since the first part of Barack Obama's term, largely due to fracking, actually. But the bottom line is this negotiation with Canada is kind of it's a fan dance, because the claim that they've taken advantage of us, or we don't have nothing that we need from them. Or as J.D. Vance said, that Canada has treated us very badly the last few decades. How could a guy who went to Ohio State say that? It's one thing to be a Yale law person to be ignorant, but for Ohio State, there's Lake Erie right there. So we're dealing with claims that are not accurate. And so here we have Mark Carney, who got elected because of Trump. The Liberal Party prevailed because of the attacks by Donald Trump, is trying to figure out a way to give, a cover to President Trump to modernize the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, which is relatively new and is required to be reviewed next year anyway. They got to figure out a way to resolve this in a realistic fashion. And that requires probably a lot of time. And I think Carney's probably playing it right, but it's how do you thread that needle?
But I do expect, regarding Diane's question, that security may end up being a much larger part of that than it has been in past trade negotiations, because that seems to be the way this is playing out.
Yeah.
Todd, you're absolutely right. And I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, or I don't write about politics per se, but his latest statement to Canada was, we're going to build the Golden Dome. And I want you to comment on this. We're going to build our Golden Dome and we're going to protect you, and you're going to have to pony up 61 billion. Unless you agree to become part of the United States, then it's free. This is the latest gambit. I mean, it's beyond insulting. And the other thing too that bears remark is that the auto plants in Canada are owned by American companies. And most of the oil that's drilled and produced in Canada is drilled and produced by Exxon and American oil companies. So America's been benefiting from the exports from Canada indirectly as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. The numbers certainly bear that out, and yet I don't think the numbers are what President Trump is necessarily concerned about. I think he's concerned with taking the American market, which is arguably the most powerful market in the world, along with obviously the European Union, and using that strength to whatever benefit he can get from it, whether that's pulling auto jobs back in from Detroit's southern neighbor in Ontario into Michigan, or pushing for extra defense spending wherever he can get it, and maybe possibly trying to find places where he can expand the American footprint, possibly geographically, although, I don't know how realistic a claim that is.
Mark Carney, Prime Minister Carney, has indicated he is supporting and going to implement increase in their defense spending. And I think it's fair to say that Prime Minister Trudeau really was reluctant to do that, talked about it, hemmed and hawed. I can tell you that forever our government has asked the NATO allies to increase. This didn't just start with Trump. We've asked all of our allies to increase their defense spending and their burden sharing, including Canada. And we've always talked about that more privately, because, being a diplomat, you don't go public and accuse the country you're serving in of being derelict on their defense spending, especially in Canada, where they've had a great record of commitment in World War I and World War II, both long before we were in those wars. They have suffered. They don't need any lecturing about war. But the reality is, Carney is trying to find a way, it appears, to show that he's increasing defense spending realistically. And that's something that President Trump will be able to cite as they resolve the make-believe trade differences.
He certainly does seem like he likes PM Carney. He certainly seems like he has a better relationship with Carney than he did with Trudeau.
Yes, and I think part of it is because Carney is highly regarded by the banking community, the financial community. He was head of the Bank of Canada, he was head of Bank of the United Kingdom. And so a guy that has access to all those financial experts is somebody that Trump will listen to else, he cares a lot about that. That's one area where he really cares. I think he wakes up worrying about the stock market and the bond market.
I think so too, but I also think he had just a personal thing with PM Trudeau. I think Trudeau was of that Obama era. It was younger. It was a different. I mean, I think there was just literally something that didn't
Yeah.
click between those two in a different way than it does with PM Carney, who I think is a different personality.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think he didn't like the idea that Trudeau was kind of treated as a rock star by the women. He didn't like that. He may have been jealous of it. I don't know.
Your words, not mine.
No, exactly. I'm an unabashed realist about these things. And of course, the Democrat, as many of you know.
There's an interesting template that I think Canada would be wise to adopt. They haven't thought of it yet, surprisingly, but again, to Jim's point that Canada has enormous treasure trove of critical minerals and energy and rare earths and all kinds of things like that. I think they're engaged here. Okay, do I have to repeat then?
Yeah, Diane, can you hear us?
We're
Yeah,
changing
okay.
microphones, Diane.
Apparently, people online could not hear us.
Oh, okay.
So we have to start from the beginning again. No,
I have to give my lecture.
no, but we didn't. We didn't.
Okay, have you got your mics organized? Okay, so let's continue. So the template I think that's evolved, which is interesting, that I think Canada and the US will do, and probably Denmark and Greenland would probably be wise to do, is that Australia just signed a gigantic deal for critical minerals and rare earths to supply it to the United States in return for buying some pretty expensive American nuclear subs, which were kind of in the pipeline, but now this is a deal. And I think Canada will be wise to do that too, and to buy military stuff, whatever it takes. And then, of course, Canada would have this gigantic partner to the south, as usual, bankrolling our development of our resources. Greenland and Denmark may probably be wise to think of that too, some kind of a swap of military for resource. What do you think of that idea?
No question. I think anything that you can do that's going to give the White House something to have an ambassador in town or a king even, and to hold up something and saying we've got this and we've got this investment for this, and now we're going to expand, the base. I mean, that's all just, that's the way this stuff is getting done these days. I couldn't agree more.
I noticed too that we have, first of all, dealing with national security, we're going to hear from Mark Grossman, who's worn many hats in our U.S. State Department, including Undersecretary for Political Affairs, but various ambassadorial assignments. We're going to be hearing from him, as well as the defense attaché from the Embassy of Denmark. That's coming up. But later, related to all this, we have a panel on the economics of Greenland, natural resources, and critical minerals. Chris Sands is going to be moderating that from the Johns Hopkins School of International Studies. But we are going to be hearing, again, from several presenters who are really well informed on critical minerals and materials, as well as energy and the economics of all of that, and how it would be developed and to whom's benefit. But we're gonna hear a lot about that. So I just wanted to mention that.
And Kuzli, we did a critical minerals conference in Washington. I think we were one of the first to be sort of pioneering and looking into the area of critical minerals. It was an excellent conference. So just to wrap it up, I want to take questions from the audience. I don't know how we're going to supervise that, whether Stephen Pale will do it with a microphone, a roving microphone, like Oprah Winfrey or what. But just in summary, Todd and Jim, what are the two biggest issues that will keep arising vis-a-vis Greenland?
I think the biggest issue that's going to keep arising regarding Greenland, even if there's the continued conversation about annexing or taking over or buying Greenland goes away is that it's going to come up again. As long as President Trump is in office, I mean, I've been covering this man for 10 years now, and I never expected to have to cover Donald Trump in my life. And when he came down the golden escalator in New York and started talking about Ford in Mexico, I put my hand on my head and thought, oh, good Lord, I'm going to have to write about this forever. And I still am. It doesn't go away. Whether it's a negotiating tactic, whether he means it for real, whether it's a combination of the two, it doesn't end. So I think that poking the other side with a stick, that trying to get a reaction, that form of negotiation is this White House's negotiation tactic. And as long as they're there, that's going to continue to some degree. That doesn't mean it can't be a profitable and beneficial relationship between all parties, because some places have found it to be so. Canada is in that place right now where it's trying to figure out exactly how to make that all work out. I think there's some feeling that it will, but I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with you. I think, you know, one of the key issue on Greenland, really, I think, in the U.S. Is how do we develop, or how does Greenland develop its resources to the benefit of our allies, including us, the U.S. and Canada? How do those get developed in a way that respects the sovereignty of Greenland and the close relationships with Denmark? There's got to be a way to do that. And I think we'll find it. I think we're going to hear about how that can happen by the last panel today. I do. The other thing is, again, how do we strengthen NATO and defy Vladimir Putin and support Ukraine in a way that will be successful rather than erratic day-to-day, the whims of our leader here? Some have joked, we have an American Pope and a Russian president. All right, I didn't make that joke. But we are going to need consistency in standing up to Putin and Russia. NATO expects it, demands it, is unified pretty much. How do we do that? Because that affects national security in Greenland.
Governor, I did have one other thing that I wanted to make mention of, is that just reading up on some things before this conference, the Greenland's push to become independent, I find fascinating. And what that's going to look like going forward vis-a-vis the US and Canada, because they're going to have some interest in that, and how that plays out is also going to be extraordinary to watch. I mean, given you know who's in the White House now, but also sort of the timing of that. It doesn't seem like, while that's something that seems to be very much of interest to Greenlanders, it does not seem like something that Greenlanders are necessarily insisting happen tomorrow. And how that plays out, I think, is going to be truly, truly interesting regarding everything else that's happening in the world.
Yeah, yes, agree. And I think, too, I'm reminded of my time in Canada when we had a referendum, a Quebec referendum. It was a very murky ballot question, but the Quebecers were trying to argue it would be literally separation. But the moderate Quebecers were saying, no, it's just really more strength and sovereignty vis-a-vis Ottawa. Anyway, it got very confusing. And of course, there was a whole group that said, we want all the benefits of being part of Canada, but we'd like to be independent. I can hear that in Greenland, which is love to be independent, but you're not going to want to cast away Denmark and on a pig and a poke with the U.S. or anybody else. So stay tuned. But we've got some other people coming in here that can really talk about a lot of this. It's certainly from my point of view with a lot more expertise.
Same here.
So, but
Okay, well, on that note, do we have time for some questions, Steve, from the audience? A question or two? If not, we'll call it a
Yes,
wrap.
we do, Diane.
Okay, good.
Please.
Please identify yourself.
Hi, Diane. My name is Gary Bahula. You earlier mentioned that Elon Musk had strategic interests in Greenland, or the Silicon Valley folks did, with respect to space travel, and you also mentioned data centers and so on. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, a few years ago, Peter Thiel, who's another Silicon Valley denizen and a partner of Musk's, suggested that a technocratic colony be created in Greenland that I presumably would be controlled by them or the United States. He's also proposed the same thing in Honduras recently. So this doesn't go away, and it's kind of in the underpinning for a lot of some of the stuff that Trump talks about. Amazon's Jeff Bezos and Microsoft's Bill Gates also support mining rare earth minerals in Greenland because these are critical to high-tech manufacturing. And then, of course, there's also the space situation. So there's sort of industrial interest and lobbying and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, I think, Greenland is sovereign. I mean, it's a part of Denmark, but if it gets independence, it'll probably definitely remain as part of the European Union. So it won't be orphaned and left to the devices of whoever wants to grab it, and it won't be up for grabs as such. But that is the interest, and it's still there. And I think it's mostly noise right now, but I think there's big money capable of helping develop it. And I don't know whether Greenland's government would be big enough to be able to accommodate and work with more intense development, mining or technologically.
By the way, I have no idea whether this context helps, hurts, or you already realize this, but Peter Thiel, I didn't realize had this potential connection with technocrats in Greenland, but Peter Thiel is intimately associated with Vice President Vance. I mean, they have connections going back some time. So
Yeah, and that gets into the whole goal of Musk of wanting to colonize Mars. And he's serious about it. I should say this before we take more questions. My views are those entirely my own. I'm a retired partner at DLA Piper. They do not reflect DLA Piper or our friends here from Denmark or Todd Spangler of the Free Press or anyone else. They're just mine. But those of you who know me know I've been around long enough to speak my mind.
And it's always interesting, Jim. We have another question, I think. We can have one more. No takers? Steve?
We have one.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Diane, for your very clarification of many points that I was never aware of. Thank you, Jim, for our invitation. I guess some of the clarity question I have is because of the grand relationship we've always had with Canada, and Greenland being in that unique situation, which all of you have historically very clear today. You talk about the independence going, or the sovereignty of Greenland. If they move to something like this, is that a plus or minus for Greenland or Denmark, or is that something that Greenland would think be more advantageous for them? Is that or just because of the Trump threat? Because he's so sporadic, you never know what he's going to do. But obviously, this deal with Australia and Trump's being turned completely off by China on the mineral situation, that seems to be a very critical situation for Greenland to make a decision as to what they're going to do. What's your thoughts about that?
Diane, did you have a thought about that?
No, I just to clarify the question, you're saying would any independence or sovereignty, further independence or more independence by Greenland have a negative adverse effect on the United States and others? Is that right?
Right. Well, yes, and with their independence with the Trump situation, you're talking about the sovereignty of Greenland and they're becoming independent. I'm a little bit murky about that because of their relationship with Denmark. So my question is that if they become more independent or more sovereign, Greenland, is that an advantage to them, or does Greenland Denmark give them more leverage as far as Trump is concerned, do you think?
And just to clarify that, the independence will only be within the context of being a member of the European Union.
Correct.
You want to weigh in on that, guys?
No, I honestly just think it's too murky a situation to really have much conversation about where Greenland ends up vis-a-vis its relationship with Denmark. I mean, what that independence looks like is certainly beyond my poor powers of prediction. They've been associated since 1397. I don't think that's going to go away overnight. But at the same time, Greenland is an Arctic country and sits very close to Canada and North America. I think those interests aren't going to go away. I think some combination of the two is how that would end up looking. But I don't think the U.S. I think the U.S. has a strong strategic incentive to remain friendly and cooperative with Greenland, and that's not going to change for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
I agree. The only thing I would add, it was interesting, was one of the big supporters of President Trump has, and some say he reflects Trump, but I think that would be unfair because he doesn't say he does, but he's a big supporter, has continued to say that he has a plan to offer Greenlanders U.S. citizenship with full benefits. However,
But they got to give up their health care and the university access.
However, we would still require Denmark to finance Greenland. So there would be no financial support from the U.S., simply give everyone in Greenland citizenship, but Greenland would still have to require all of its financing from Denmark, which of course is like totally unrealistic in my opinion. But
Well,
that's,
I will jump in on that point. I have the same question because from a political standpoint, the idea of the U.S. paying a subsidy the way Denmark does to support Greenlanders, you would think is politically a non-starter. When you talk about foreign aid being a problem for the American electorate, you got to think that would never happen. And yet, you see polls that suggest that depending on whether or not you are a Democrat or a Republican, whether you voted for Vice President Harris or you voted for President Trump, you're willing to, suddenly inflation is not a problem right now if you voted for President Trump, even though it was a problem when Biden was in office. So therefore, maybe there will be people, if he's the one saying, yes, we would subsidize Greenlanders to be part of this, maybe some portion would buy it. It's the world turned upside down politically, and so it's very difficult to say how that would play out.
agree. And we're also, they're pretty silent about sending 20 million to Argentina. I'd hate to be a president saying I'm going to give 20 million to a country that continually has failed economically and financially and is corrupt. But they're great people. So anyway,
Well,
Diane, let's let you
on that
close
note,
this
yep.
out.
On that note, thank you very much, guys, for your questions and the audience for listening. And I think Greenland is a dark horse issue. Stay tuned, watch it. It may pop up and it may be surprisingly important. But at this point, I think we've covered pretty much the fact that it'll be status quo. Thank you.
Thank you.
And go Blue Jays.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.